Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. What would you do if you heard loud music deep in your woods and found a DJ and 40 people hosting a community BBQ on your private pond, like they'd reserved it? I told the organizer to leave. She laughed and said, "Call the sheriff." So I did, and seconds later her whole confidence vanished. Why? I've been a sheriff for 15 years in this county, and I thought I'd seen every type of entitled behavior imaginable. Turns out I was wrong. This happened a few months ago on what started as a perfectly normal Saturday morning. My property sits on about 40 acres of wooded land about 20 minutes outside town. It's not fancy, but it's mine. The previous owner had dug out a nice-sized pond and stocked it with bass and bluegill before selling. That pond became my favorite spot to unwind after long weeks dealing with the usual small-town drama, drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional meth lab bust. The whole reason I bought the place was for the privacy. My nearest neighbor is about half a mile down a dirt road, and most people don't even know there's a house back here. I've got a long gravel driveway with several no trespassing and private property signs posted along the way, though some have gotten weathered over the years. Pretty hard to miss unless you're deliberately ignoring them. That Saturday morning, I was doing what I do most weekends, catching up on yard work. I had on my rattiest jeans, work boots with holes, and an old t-shirt that had seen better days. My wife was visiting her sister for the weekend, so I figured I'd tackle some projects around the property. I'd been clearing brush near the pond when I heard something that made me stop dead in my tracks. Music. Loud music. The kind you hear at county fairs with thumping bass that carries for miles. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from the road, but as I walked toward the sound, it became clear the noise was coming from my pond, my private pond, on my private property. I pushed through the tree line and couldn't believe what I saw. There had to be 30 or 40 people scattered around my pond. Kids were running around, adults were sitting in lawn chairs, and someone had set up what looked like a full DJ setup with speakers. But that wasn't the worst part. Right there, next to my dock, was a massive, bouncy castle. Not some small backyard thing, but one of those industrial-sized inflatables you rent for big events. Cars were parked all over my grass, some of them blocking the path I used to get equipment back to the pond. Coolers and grills were set up everywhere, and people were acting like they owned the place. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what I was seeing. In all my years in law enforcement, I'd dealt with plenty of trespassing cases, but nothing quite this bold. These people hadn't just wandered onto my property by mistake, they'd planned an entire event. The tire tracks in my grass were deep from all the vehicles, and I could already see where someone had dumped charcoal ash near my favorite fishing spot. A few people had even brought portable tables that they'd set up right on the bank where I usually cast my line. I walked over to where a woman in her 40s was directing traffic, literally waving cars to park spots on my lawn. She had on designer sunglasses and was barking orders at people setting up tables. Everything about her screamed, "I'm in charge here." I approached her with my hands visible and my voice calm. Years of de-escalation training kicked in automatically. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think there might be some confusion here. This is private property, and you're going to need to pack up and move your event." She looked me up and down, taking in my work clothes and dirty hands. Then she laughed. Actually laughed in my face. "Private property? Says who?" She gestured toward the pond like she was presenting evidence. "We checked online and everything looked public. There were no trespassing signs where we came in." That was interesting, since I knew there were at least 3 signs along the driveway. Either she'd deliberately ignored them, or come in from the back way through the woods, which would have been even more obviously trespassing. I kept my voice level. "I'm the property owner, and I'm asking you politely to gather your people and leave." That's when she really went off. She stepped closer, getting right in my personal space with her finger pointed at my chest. "Listen here, whoever you are, we've been planning this community BBQ for weeks. Some random guy in dirty clothes isn't going to ruin our event because he's jealous he wasn't invited. Ma'am, I'm telling you this is private property, you need to leave." Her voice got louder and people started looking over. Around us I could see parents helping their kids in and out of the bouncy castle, teenagers throwing a football near my dock, and adults lounging in chairs they'd brought. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, completely oblivious to the fact they were trespassing. "If you really think you own this land, then go ahead and call the county sheriff. I dare you." "Until then, get off my party." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept a straight face. Okay, I'll do exactly that. I walked back toward the tree line while pulling out my phone. I called dispatch and spoke to Sarah, who's been working communications for about 8 years. Hey, it's Sheriff Rodriguez. I need 2 units at my residence for a trespassing situation. I'm off duty and out of uniform, so the subjects don't know who I am yet. Sarah chuckled on the other end. You want me to send Martinez and Thompson? Perfect. Tell them to come in with lights but no sirens. This should be interesting. While I waited, I watched the party continue. The woman who'd confronted me was holding court near the grills, probably telling everyone about the crazy local who'd tried to ruin their fun. I could see her gesturing in my direction and shaking her head dramatically. What struck me was how organized this whole thing was. Someone had clearly put a lot of thought and effort into planning this event. There were coolers everywhere, multiple grills going, and even a designated area where people had piled up trash bags. These weren't random people who'd stumbled onto my property. This was a coordinated gathering. I counted the vehicles and came up with 14 cars and trucks, plus what looked like a rental van that probably belonged to the DJ. Some of the cars had out-of-county plates, suggesting people had driven pretty far for this community event. A few kids had discovered the old rope swing I'd hung from an oak tree near the water and were taking turns launching themselves into the pond. Under different circumstances, I might have found it amusing, but right now all I could think about was liability issues if someone got hurt. About 20 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of patrol vehicles coming up my driveway. 2 county cruisers with light bars flashing pulled into the clearing. The music stopped, and suddenly everyone was staring. The woman marched over to the deputies before they'd even gotten out of their cars. I could hear her from 50 yards away, explaining how some crazy guy in work clothes had been harassing her guests and trying to shut down their community event. Deputy Martinez stepped out of his cruiser first, followed by Deputy Thompson from the 2nd unit. Both good officers who'd worked for me for years. They looked around at the scene, taking in the bouncy castle, the DJ setup, and all the people scattered around my property. Martinez spotted me standing at the edge of the clearing and nodded. Good morning, Sheriff. How do you want to handle this? The transformation on that woman's face was something I'll never forget. The color drained right out of it as she realized what Martinez had just said. She looked from the deputies to me and back again, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my badge wallet, holding it up so everyone could see. I think we've got a trespassing situation here, officers. The crowd had gone completely silent. Parents were quietly gathering their kids, and I could see people starting to pack up their stuff without being asked. The DJ had already started unplugging equipment. The woman tried to recover, but you could tell she was rattled. There's been a mistake. We thought this was public land. The internet said it was a community area. Thompson, who's got a good sense of humor, looked around at the scattered private property signs. Ma'am, where exactly did you see that information? She started stammering about Facebook posts and community groups, but it was clear she was scrambling for an explanation. Someone in the neighborhood group said this was available for events. And you didn't think to verify that with the county? Martinez asked, pulling out his citation book. Meanwhile, the exodus had begun in earnest. Cars were pulling out, and people were loading coolers and chairs as fast as they could. Nobody wanted to stick around for whatever was about to happen. But the bouncy castle was a different story. That thing was enormous and still inflated with a few kids inside. The woman kept insisting that they couldn't just abandon it because she'd put down a deposit with the rental company. That's not really my problem, I told her. You're trespassing on private property and everything here needs to be removed today. She tried a different approach, suddenly getting all apologetic. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I had no idea you were the sheriff. Can't we work something out? It's just a misunderstanding. You told me to call the county sheriff and I did. You also told me to get off your party on my land. Martinez was writing citations while Thompson documented the scene with his camera. Ma'am, I'm citing you for criminal trespassing and unlawful use of private property. There's also going to be a charge for potential property damage from all these vehicles on the lawn. Property damage? We didn't damage anything, Thompson pointed to the deep tire tracks rutting up my grass in the area where someone had dumped ash from a grill. Those tire tracks are going to take months to recover, and dumping waste on private property is a violation. The bouncy castle situation became the real problem. The woman called the rental company and discovered they charged extra for emergency pickup, especially on weekends. The fee was apparently substantial because I watched her face go pale when they quoted the price. $300 just to pick it up today? But it's not my fault there was confusion about the property. The rental company obviously didn't care about her confusion. While she argued on the phone, more families packed up and left. The crowd had shrunk from 40 people to maybe 12, mostly relatives or close friends who felt obligated to stick around. One older gentleman came over and introduced himself as the woman's father-in-law. "I'm sorry about all this, Sheriff. I told her this seemed like private property when we drove in, but she insisted she'd checked with someone in the neighborhood." "No hard feelings," I told him. "Mistakes happen, but everything does need to be cleared out today." What really surprised me was how much stuff these people had brought. Beyond the obvious things like chairs and coolers, there were pop-up tents, folding tables, a portable sound system, lawn games, and enough food to feed twice the number of people who'd showed up. Someone had clearly spent serious money planning this event. The DJ finished packing his equipment and came over to apologize. Turns out he was just a friend doing them a favor, not a professional they'd hired. "I'm really sorry about this, Sheriff. She told me it was all cleared with the community association. I never would have set up here if I'd known it was private property." "Don't worry about it, just make sure everything gets loaded up." The rental company crew finally arrived about an hour later. They weren't happy about the emergency call, especially when they realized the situation involved law enforcement. It took them another hour to deflate and pack up the bouncy castle, and I could tell the woman wasn't pleased about paying the extra fee. While they worked on the inflatable, I walked around the pond area to check for any damage. Besides the tire tracks and some trash, there were a few spots where people had trampled the bank pretty badly. Nothing permanent, but it would take some time to recover. Martinez and Thompson finished their paperwork and handed the woman her citations. The total fines came to just over $600, not including court costs. She looked like she wanted to argue, but with her friends and family watching, she just took the tickets without saying much. "You have 30 days to pay or contest these in court," Thompson explained. "The court date is printed on each citation if you want to fight them." By the time everything was cleared out, it was early afternoon. My peaceful Saturday of yard work had turned into an impromptu law enforcement operation, but I had to admit it was more entertaining than cleaning gutters. After everyone left, I spent some time walking the property to assess what had happened. The woman had claimed they came in without seeing signs, but the main entrance was clearly marked. There was a back trail that connected to a county road about 2 miles away, but it was overgrown and would have been obviously difficult to navigate with cars. My best guess was that someone in her social circle had told her about the pond, maybe even given directions, without mentioning it was private property, or maybe they'd driven by before and made assumptions about public access. Either way, the scale of the event suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. I never did find out exactly how she'd learned about my property or why she thought it was available for public events, but the story spread through town pretty quickly. Within a week, I was hearing references to the BBQ incident at the coffee shop and the hardware store. A month later, I ran into the DJ at a gas station. He recognized me and came over to apologize again. "That whole thing was such a mess," he said. "She's still complaining about the citations and the bouncy castle fee. I think she's planning to fight the tickets in court." I later heard from the court clerk that the woman had indeed hired a lawyer to contest the citations. Her argument was apparently that the property wasn't clearly marked as private and that she'd made an honest mistake based on information from community social media groups. The judge wasn't buying it. According to the clerk, he'd reviewed Thompson's photos and noted that there were multiple signs along the main driveway. The woman's own admission that she'd planned a large event without verifying ownership or obtaining proper permits worked against her case. She ended up paying the full fines plus court costs and attorney fees. The total probably came to over $1,000 when everything was said and done, not counting what she'd spent on food and the emergency bouncy castle pickup. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I worked for a county psychiatric emergency services unit for 8 years many years ago. The unit was connected to a hospital, so there were patients referred from the emergency department, but the primarily role of the unit was to evaluate patients in their homes, other hospitals, or jails, and initiate the civil commitment process if certain legal criteria were met. The unit was open 24 hours per day, running shifts from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for the most part. At various times I worked on all 3 shifts, and I was very well known. For me, the best part of the job was going out to other facilities, and I was definitely in the minority on that point. Most of the staff wanted to see patients from our own emergency department. Typically, each staff would handle 1-2 cases per shift. If the patient was from our emergency department and could be admitted to our hospital's unit, then that staff might only actually work 2 hours of their 8-hour shift, and then they'd spend the rest of that time chatting, answering crisis calls, and largely trying to avoid being assigned another case. I like to be busy and to keep moving, and I found downtime on the crisis unit to be torture. I would routinely take on second cases just to stay active, and this routinely meant that I was staying past my shift end, as I did not like handing cases to another staff member at shift change because too often information got lost in the mix. The early morning was often dead quiet, with referrals ramping up midday. I requested and was approved to work from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. My new shift was embraced by the rest of the day shift, who predominantly did not want to take outreach cases. Cases were supposed to be assigned based on employee arrival, but within weeks I would walk into work to find staff that arrived at 7 a.m. sitting around while an outreach case had sat for hours because they knew I would want to go out on a call right away. Now this was true, and I didn't care much about that part because I got to leave, but it gives you some idea of the attitudes of the other staff. Now comes the malicious compliance part. Fake names are being used. Alan, the actual 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift supervisor, worked another full-time job, and he did not arrive to the unit until around 5:30 p.m. That meant the day shift supervisor, Danielle, would have to give shift report to another staff member who would then pass shift report to Alan. This was usually done the same way cases were assigned. First 311 staff to arrive would receive reports, so this interim supervisor would change day to day based on arrival. Over time, though, Danielle started giving me shift report to pass on every day that I worked, despite 311 staff being present. Because of this consistency, a lot of people mistook me for an actual supervisor, and I was called by other departments to weigh in on things, to sign off on problem cases, and to provide consults, none of which were part of my actual job. Actual supervisors received a small pay differential, which was largely meaningless, but I mention it here as an arguing point. I was very much treated as a supervisor only when it was convenient. When difficult decisions had to be made or when someone had to get on the phone and argue a clinical decision with another facility, I was in charge according to the other staff. But if a case came in between 3 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. and I tried to assign it to a staff member, they would refuse, stating that they would wait for Alan to arrive to assign it because he was the real supervisor, which was fair because I wasn't. Alan would arrive and see cases that had been sitting since 3 p.m. and want to know why no one had started them. I'd shrug and explain my position, and he would sigh and start assigning work. Meanwhile, other facilities had been calling and asking for updates as to when someone from my unit would be arriving, and complaining about delays. John, the unit director, got wind of these complaints and asked to speak to me. I explained the situation, that I was not a supervisor both in title and in pay rate, and the other staff knew that I did not have any authority to make them work. He told me that he did not have a job title or the funds to give me a supervisor role, which I knew. I told him I did not want to be the interim supervisor every day, or ever again really. John's response was that my judgment was more trusted around our hospital and other facilities compared to many of the other staff, that he liked having someone with more training left in charge, the job required a master's degree, and I was finishing my doctorate, and that I took the job very seriously. Shouldn't all of his employees be taking it seriously? John's solution? He walked me back onto the unit, where I'm sure gave the impression that I had gone to John complaining that staff did not listen to me. He asked for everyone's attention and announced that I could assign cases to anyone I wanted. That was it. He could not put it in writing because I had no authority by title, and the reality of the situation was that staff who did not listen to me would be supported by human resources for that exact reason. The following 2 days, cases came in. I asked staff to go. They declined, and we sat and waited for Alan to arrive. On day 3, a call came in around 3:15 p.m. from the hospital farthest away from our facility in our county, a 40-minute drive one way. As soon as I announced the case to the staff, I saw nothing but eye rolls and people going back to crossword puzzles or reading. I suggested 1 or 2 of the staff would be best suited to handle it, and I got no response, not even no. John said I could assign anyone I wanted to a case, so I went to the logbook, assigned the case to myself, grabbed keys to one of the unit vehicles, and left without saying a word. I would often walk around in the hospital, so no one questioned me leaving the unit. I was almost at the facility when I got the first call on my cell phone from the unit. Chris, one of the people I did not supervise, had received a call from our inpatient unit asking for a consult. I told Chris that she should handle it, and I hung up. 20 minutes later, Danny, another not my supervisee, called to say that the inpatient psychiatrist called back asking when the consult would be done. I asked why Chris had not done it, and Danny replied that the shift had discussed it, and felt that it would be better if I dealt with the psychiatrist. I replied that if the consult was urgent, one of them would have to do it because I would not be back for a long time. Danny says, "A long time? Aren't you in the ER?" I reply, "I'm at Memorial Hospital, asked Chris to do the consult," and I hung up. 15 minutes later, John, the unit director, calls me from his home since he leaves at 3 p.m. I answer the phone and quickly tell him that I'll have to call him back as I'm in a tense situation with the patient I'm seeing, and I hang up. John calls the hospital unit where I'm seeing the patient and asks staff to put me on the phone. He asks where I am, and I reply that he just called me at Memorial's inpatient unit. Okay, why am I there? Now, that's the question I've been waiting for. You told everyone on the unit that I could assign cases to anyone I wanted, so I assigned it to me. I told him that I had suggested other staff take it and no one wanted it, I could not make them, and it was a priority case as a patient had assaulted 2 other patients and a nurse, and the assaultive patient needs to be moved to a higher level of care ASAP, a process that I was almost finished with before the evening shift supervisor had even arrived to assign the case to someone else. The point that John could not argue against, I was not going to sit around waiting while someone else might get hurt. I was not privy to what John said to the other staff afterward, but I was told that he was livid, telling the staff that while I was not a supervisor in title, staff needed to view assignments from me as being backed directly by him, and refusals would be considered insubordination, grounds for suspension or termination. From that point on, staff took the cases I assigned them. If I caught any attitude, I'd just hold the case up and ask, "You or me?" and then they would grab the case out of my hand and get to work. The next one is an entitled people story. My husband and I host a tabletop game on a semi-regular basis. Until a few months ago, that included Joe and his girlfriend Carrie. Before I go into what happened, let me give you a little background. My husband and I tried our best to be kind for Joe's sake, but Carrie is a difficult person. She thinks she is entitled to say and do whatever she wants regardless of the consequences without comment. At one point, my husband said it's important to consider how our actions affect others, and she responded, "That's your opinion." In the tabletop game we were playing, whenever we started strategizing, her character would get bored and wander off to get attention by doing plot derailing things like breaking the law in front of the town guards. One way to ensure she brought something up all the time was to say no. She often brought up playing at their house, which was 30 minutes out of the way. She convinced Joe to go on a divorce show with her. No, they've never even been engaged. Then kept suggesting my husband and I could also get on TV and make a few $100, and she couldn't understand why we weren't interested. Worst of all, she often made tone-deaf jokes about topics multiple people in the room had trauma with, including reproductive health, assault, and dead dogs, the last one being its own special story. Now, Joe was never the most punctual person in the world, but Carrie magnified that. They asked us to move the game to a weekday evening, so Carrie could have the weekend for her occasional freelance work as a clown. Even with the move, they frequently canceled with little notice, often because Carrie had whoopsie planned something and forgot to put it on the calendar again. When they did show up, they could be over an hour late, always for very important reasons like she really wanted McDonald's instead of the pizza we'd already ordered. It became such an issue that we moved the start time later, so naturally they started arriving later. A couple weeks before my birthday, I texted the group saying I had made plans for the weekends before and after the actual day and invited the group to join either. Joe and Carrie were going to be out of town both weekends, but at their suggestion, the group planned a low-key game night on my birthday, which was a Tuesday, the Saturday before Joe cancels. Why? He just remembered he had concert tickets that day. He was sorry. Carrie said, "It's not my fault, I don't even like rock concerts, let's move to Monday." As they knew, hubby and I had limited to no reception over the weekend, so even if I had wanted to coordinate rescheduling, it was too late. I wrote, "I'm celebrating my birthday on the day I was born with whoever wants to join." That Tuesday, another friend got sick, and we ended up canceling the night altogether. For this and various more serious, unrelated reasons, that week was really rough. Hubby and I decided to cancel our next game night, saying I was still feeling raw about everything and wasn't up for hanging out just yet. Everyone else said they understood and take care. Carrie asked if they could still bring me a present. I said I appreciate it, but just needed space for the moment. She exploded. I got a lengthy text about how she doesn't like the way I've been speaking to her. They had gotten the tickets months ago, it was an honest mistake, and acting like we've done something wrong is not okay. She said my texts were aggressive and made her feel scolded, that I should have sent her a personalized message if I had a problem, and that I have no right to have a problem anyway. At one point I mentioned how deflating it can be to clean and prep a house only for people to cancel, so she suggested they help by hosting the game at their house. Oh, and by the way, they'd like to come by really soon with the present. The present got brought up a lot. Later in the conversation, they accidentally copy-pasted the full dialogue with ChatGPT they'd been using to write to us. She defended this by saying she was just using it to make the conversation less emotional. We could see she had written things like, add in that I won't monitor her feelings. I really did try to smooth things over, but ultimately she decided to walk away from the game. She told Joe she was going to show grace by stepping aside so that he could maintain a friendship with us. All she asked was he make it clear that he agrees we're being unfair, she's done nothing wrong. The problem was my trauma, and he was not going to tolerate our calling her rude or insensitive. Well, graceful as that was of her, our friendship with Joe has also ended. The next one is an entitled parent story. So I 24F live with my mom, 60F. I went through a breakup a few months ago and moved back in with her to get back on my feet. She told me her apartment is always open to me because she views it as her way of repaying me for my bad childhood. For a little context, she is an addict and she caused us to be homeless and in abusive situations for my entire childhood. She's stolen from me many times and I've been taken by CPS thrice. Regardless, she's been sober for a few years and I was grateful for a place to stay while I'm full-time in college, which prevents me from working enough to pay rent elsewhere. She is on a housing program, which means her rent is fully paid for and she gets a rebate. When I moved in, I had a part-time job, so I had to pay income-based rent and she lost her rebate. But 2 months in, I quit, and now we get an even bigger rebate because we're two people, which I let her fully take. Otherwise, we pay the phone bill, utility, and renter's insurance 50-50. I pay the Wi-Fi and my own bills like car insurance, car loans, student loans, some of the streaming services, etc. from my savings while I wait for summer to start. She buys food with her food stamps and by going to food pantries, but I don't really eat a lot of what she gets and just buy my own stuff, which I'll also share with her. She's always had car problems. When I first moved in, she took out a loan to get what was supposed to be her forever car. About a month or two ago, however, she drove it without oil and rendered it unusable unless she gets another loan. She goes back and forth on whether she was aware there wasn't any oil in it, depending on whether she's willing to admit fault that day. As you know, this time of year is the end of the semester and thus finals. I go to class full-time 5 days a week, 30-minute commute each way, and I have 5 courses. Needless to say, I spend a lot of time on my coursework and have a lot of stuff to do for finals. I also just got into a relationship, so when I find the time, usually once a week, I go spend a day and night at my boyfriend's house. It's basically the only fun I get to have out of the house. However, because my mom's car broke, I now have to be the one to take her anywhere she needs to go. I refuse to let her borrow it because of her past with accidents. She doesn't necessarily have any responsibilities, so it's mostly because she wants to go to the store or do other errands. I've taken her to the store, appointments, food pantries, etc. many times in the past month. I even got my boyfriend to drive her to the airport for free with these gas prices. However, it's not enough for her. If it were up to her, it would be 3 to 4 times a week. The problem about bringing her to the store is the length. She has ADHD and she's a stoner. Last time I brought her to Walmart, she made me turn around 3 times because each time she forgot something. Once was just she forgot to wear jewelry. And then engaged in conversation with someone outside for 10 minutes, all while I was sick and wanted to lie down. Then she goes in for 2 hours, comes out, and then tells me when she gets home she forgot a bunch of stuff and will need to go back sometime soon. I simply do not have the time for shenanigans like this. Recently I made a plan to go to my boyfriend's on the 1st, which as many know is when food stamps drop. One thing to know is we are not at a lack for food. She hits up 3 different food pantries and we have a horde of non-perishables, but it's not what she wants. She acted like she was giving me a choice and recognizing I was busy because she asked if I would rather take her shopping that day or to an hour-long loan appointment before my class on Thursday. I chose the latter because it fit my schedule better and she said okay. I came home that weekend and I could hear her on the phone complaining about me to her friend when she thought I wasn't there. She was saying how I don't realize how good I have it. don't appreciate the opportunity of living her, and abandoned her for the weekend with no food. Factually and objectively not true. I interrupted the phone call and we got in a pretty big fight about how much I make her feel like a burden and that she has to beg me to take her places. We each said some pretty hurtful things to one another, and I'm not proud of all of what I said, but there were low blows all around. When I brought up that I didn't leave her with no food and she gave me a choice and I picked the loan appointment, she said that I should have just done both and she shouldn't have to make me choose. None of this was said to my face until now. She kept telling me she was going to ask her aunt to do it. I told her I'm not a mind reader. She also kept referencing an interaction last week where I came into her room and complained about our building's washing machines, and I said I'll just start pre-washing the extra dirty stuff in the sink. She said something like, "Or we can just make a day, few hours of it and go to the laundromat together." I did kind of sigh because she always does this, tries to turn something into an excuse for me to take her somewhere. I said I didn't care that much and that even though the washer is mediocre, the convenience of it being a walk down the stairs beats going all the way to the laundromat because I can go sit in my bed in my PJs while I wait. But she just kept pushing and pushing till I just said, "Damn, anything to get you out of the house, huh?" I guess this really upset her, and I shouldn't have vocalized it, but it's genuinely an everyday thing, and I cannot be a personal chauffeur or responsible for her being stuck in the house just because I live with her and have a car. There's so much more, but this is the bulk of it, and it's just so exhausting. Anyway, thank you for watching.